Alrighty, why America is terribly designed. That is the video we're looking at. This comes from OBF. This will be linked in the description down below, so make sure to check it out. I imagine that this is going to be really interesting. I don't really know what to expect. I imagine it's going to be obviously centered around cities and how they are designed. And my main prediction will be that maybe there's like a lack of public transport. I know there is compared to most countries. And where there is some, it's usually pretty bad. And also maybe cities being really big and spread out. I'm not really sure. So let's see what we're looking at. I unfortunately, like many Americans, have not gotten to travel internationally other than really at the tip of Mexico, the southern area of Canada. Not really outside of the Americas at all. I really want to see what this is about. Here we go, guys.
It's a map of Philadelphia's parking lot density over a small area. The pink patches represent parking lots, and as you can see, they're all quite large and quite close to each other. Now, Philadelphia has a population of 1.6 million people, but they have 2.2 million parking spaces. So Philadelphia has more car slots than it does human beings, which should sound absolutely ridiculous to anyone. But if you've never experienced anything else, you might not understand the depth of this problem. So let's compare Philadelphia to a European city. Amsterdam, for example.
Okay.
A city that's roughly the same size in population, but with a completely different view on urban planning. Now sure, they do have parking lots, but instead of having an excess of one per person, they instead have one for every 3 people. Although that's not the entire story, because 40% of these parking spaces are actually underground, making room above ground for what is significantly more important: sidewalks and bike lanes. And to understand why they are so important, you only need to use some common sense. See,
okay, so right away, 1 minute in, that is actually kind of mind-blowing from my American perspective. It is kind of a cool concept. You park all the cars, or most of the cars, underground, and then you have these clean streets with basically bicycles, foot traffic, sidewalks, footpaths, whatever you want to call them. You just have a much cleaner, less dangerous and less hectic traffic flow upstairs on the ground, right? Cars are a big issue because they're big and they're fast and they're dangerous, and it's an odd mix. It can be an odd mix when you're dealing with people on bicycles and scooters and on foot and in, a Corvette.
If you have a car-based city, or country for that matter, with no bike lanes or sidewalks, you are actively excluding those who can't afford to pay thousands of dollars a year on a car from society, since they can't go to and from work or even to the grocery store in a safe, efficient way. And if you add to that terrible public transportation, it will lead to charts like this, where you can clearly see the most popular mode of transport in America that just so happens to be the car, which
that looks like it's about 85%, maybe 90%. That is not surprising. That is not surprising at all. I'll take that. That's definitely more than fair. I will admit it. We are a car-based country. It's not even, one city more than another. No, pretty much all our cities and even medium cities, small towns, they're mostly car-based. It is true. That's how it works.
Which isn't too surprising, since America is designed for cars, not humans.
It is designed for cars.
And while there are some sidewalks and bike lanes in the United States' largest cities, they are either unprotected and really scary to use, or just end abruptly, with no other.
Yes, you'll see a lot of this. Sidewalks will just end, and it's like, I've been following this for a mile, and now it ends, and there's just grass and the road. That is a problem I've seen, very common. And also, I do see in a lot of cities, we do have bike lanes, so they're there. But again, they're kind of an afterthought. I don't feel like the road is designed for them. They're just there on the side. It is still a car-dominant road and intersections, and being on a bike, quite frankly, would be really scary and is something that I don't personally partake in.
The option but to use the street itself to walk or bike on, which is really not ideal if you want to send your kids to school on their own or to get some milk in the store. I mean, I biked everywhere when I was a kid, and it seems like if you're under 16 in the US and therefore don't have your driver's license yet, you're practically under house arrest until your parents come home. which doesn't sound that fun to me. And I remember clearly when I visited the United States with my parents a few years back that whenever we tried to walk anywhere, it felt like we were intruding on the car's territory, since we literally had to walk through various parking lots and streets with no sidewalks in sight to get to our destination just a few hundred meters away. And it doesn't have to be this way. See, the streets of Amsterdam, for example, are filled with pedestrians because they have sidewalks that aren't at all scary to use, because you feel separated from the road.
Yeah, you see that flow of bicycles, way more bicycles. I've never seen that many bicycles in my life as an American. Like seeing dozens of people in one camera shot there, riding their bicycles smoothly and, presumably without much worry, is just kind of mind-blowing to me. So this is kind of interesting already. Also, all the people walking, you'll see that in some cities, but again, it's different. This is a nice, clean setup. Everyone's kind of close, but it's not dangerous. Wow, this is a lot different than I would have thought. I knew this video was going to be interesting, but ooh, this is a little eye-opening.
And that's because you are separated from the road. The most beautiful thing about Amsterdam, though, is that it's incredibly bike-friendly, as it's filled with designated bike lanes that don't end abruptly and are instead carefully laid out all over the city to make it easy for people to commute anywhere. Amsterdam even has no car zones and even underground bike parking spaces that look pretty insane.
Whoa.
Something you'd never find in the US.
Yo, that is freaking awesome. Look at that.
Bike parking spaces that look pretty insane. Something you'd never find in the US. But if you think it's unfair to compare the United States to literally the best city for bikes in the world, then just remember it's practically the same story in all of Europe's largest cities like Copenhagen or Paris. Now sure, they aren't at the same level as Amsterdam, but whenever I bike around Copenhagen, I don't feel like a car is going to hit me, because we have our own designated lanes that are sometimes as wide as the road itself. Yeah. And you might think, well, the United States will never be able to get to that level, so why even compare them? But
yeah, keep in mind, I hate to say it, but you would think at this point the US is too far gone. It's too big for one. You got to keep in mind the US is really, really big, really big. Canada's really big. Even Mexico is pretty big. Another one, Australia. Australia is really big. But France and Germany and England and random countries you can name in Europe are going to be a lot smaller than the U.S. So I think that's part of it. But when you're talking about cities, I agree that they could have been designed better, because then you're not talking about the size of the country. You're talking about a city that could have been done well within that city limit. I do agree it could have been done better, but I think at this point it's too far gone. It is just what it is. It is what it is, because you see this looks like maybe California or something. It says LA Care there, kind of looks like California highways. Look at this. How are you going to undo this? It's so car-based. Everyone has cars. There's like 30 million cars or something in Los Angeles alone, or something crazy. You're never going to undo that, in my opinion. I don't want to sound closed-minded, but that's the problem. It's so car-based. Is it too far gone?
The thing is, and this might surprise you, not too long ago, the United States' largest cities were actually designed exactly like these European cities. Take for example Houston, that currently looks like this, with tons of space allocated to these massive parking lots. Seems like it's always been this way, but that's not the case, because in 1920, Houston looked like this, with a lot more space for pedestrians. They could actually walk around the city without fearing for their lives or feeling like they were intruding on the car's territory. This means the United States didn't design their cities to be this way, they bulldozed them to be. And while European metropolitan areas are increasingly rolling back on the car's dominance with high-speed trains, metros, and non-automotive methods of transit, the United States is increasing their dependence on cars by expanding highways and demolishing houses, apartment complexes, businesses, and schools to fit them. Which doesn't really make any sense. I mean, if a city is expanding their number of highway lanes from 16 to 20, there is a problem. So I've been trying to figure out why they've done this to themselves and what actually happened. And what I found was surprising, to say the least. Here, take a look at this. In cities like Charlotte or Portland, Oregon, there's parking lot minimums that are placed in high schools, which is actually a practice adopted by many states and cities. And
God, I'll admit, seeing those overhead pictures of parking lots with all the cars just flying around and it looks so claustrophobic. As someone too, may I mention, that always has big trucks or big SUVs, I feel that pain a lot because most parking spaces, even though we're in America, they still don't fit trucks properly. So if you're in a big vehicle and you're in these crazy, like crowded parking lots, it is a nightmare. I will admit that.
And this means that a high school containing hallways, a cafeteria, an auditorium, offices, restrooms, gyms, and everything in between can be around 5,100 square feet in size, just for the buildings alone. But because of these parking lot minimums, a school of this size must also have a parking lot that's half the size of the entire school. That means 2,005 square feet of space has to be allocated to parking lots and driving aisles alone. Which is absolutely insane, as this simply isn't an option in some areas. But since it's preset in many school budgets, it just leads to cramped learning spaces and an emphasis on buying cars to get to and from school. It's essentially
those measurements sound off, by the way. Yeah, that is weird that they have, some of these cities also have minimums. Like, we are going to have a big slab of asphalt and make it a parking lot. Like, it is bizarre. It's weird. It
just leads to cramped learning spaces and an emphasis on buying cars to get to and from school. It's essentially a silent message sent to students, teachers, and parents. Buy cars or else.
Yeah.
I mean, this would never work in Copenhagen. Not only don't we have space for that, but there's no need. We don't drive our kids to school here. We just give them their backpack and then they either walk or bike to school from the age of 6. Alone, I might add. That's normal.
That is different than us.
But going back to the parking lots, it's simply the result of city planners mandating nearly 3 to 8 parking spaces in city areas per car. A practice that started in the 1930s as cars became more affordable for the average American family. But cars were also decreasing in price in Europe at this time, yet they didn't bulldoze their cities to make room for them. So something strange is happening here. And experts are asking for an end to the massive parking lot requirements because of the valuable space they eat and the uglification of the urban landscape. And I tend to agree that this isn't particularly beautiful. So what about the solutions? What about instead of remodeling entire cities, the United...
I'll admit, this is something I maybe just didn't pay attention to before. This is educating me, I will admit it. When we see this overhead, you see some vegetation, you see buildings of all different sorts. There's some good skylines in the US, of course, but it is weird seeing overhead, seeing all these nice areas, some cool buildings, and then parking lot, building, parking lot, parking lot, parking lot, parking lot, building. They're like weirdly gapped and pieced together weird because of so many parking lots, and there's cars in every single one of them. It's kind of mind-blowing. Whoa, this just looks crowded. Wow.
United States just implemented better public transport. I mean, in Copenhagen I live right next to both a train station, metro station and bus stop. And therefore, I can literally go anywhere in Copenhagen without the need of a car or bike for that matter. So would that be a good idea? Well, currently only 5% of Americans use public transportation. And there's actually a very simple reason for that. It's terrible. This is a map of Chicago's train system. If you look at its design, it's not...
By the way, Chicago, hey, right here, represent. Chicago, believe it or not, is usually considered one of the better public transport cities in America. And keep in mind, this is for American standards. I'm not saying it's good like Copenhagen or somewhere in Europe. Not saying that. But for American system, it is considered one of the better ones. But I'm sure he's still going to find many flaws in it.
This is a map of Chicago's train system. If you look at its design, it's not very hard to figure out what it was built to do. All its different lines intersect here, in Chicago's downtown, and then fan outward. This is a system that's really good at moving people between the suburbs or the outer rings of the city and then downtown, meaning there's a complete lack of routes going from suburb to suburb, making it useless to a lot of people who need those connections for public transport to make sense. Transit systems across the US were built to serve a very specific type of commute, from outside the center of the city to inside it.
Yeah.
But studies show that today, the most common American commute is actually from suburb to suburb, routes that public transit in the US usually doesn't serve. And the train routes that do exist aren't exactly desirable. I think it's time to talk about Amtrak. Amtrak has become somewhat of a plague on the American railway system. with constant train derailment, increased taxpayer funding, expensive tickets, and lack of connectivity. This means most Americans aren't too keen on using trains to get around, even if they technically serve a route they could use. Stations are also far from each other, and major train riding cities like Boston, Washington, and New Jersey haven't gotten an upgrade in years. The system pales in comparison to Switzerland's sophisticated railways. They're more than 400.
Well, how do you compare to Switzerland's railway? I mean, look at where it's at. The Swiss Alps, the mountains everywhere, the beautiful scenery, and I'm sure it's more efficient. Yeah, that's gonna win. That's gonna win.
50 million passengers use each year, which, by the way, is around 13 times as many passengers as Amtrak has per year. And let's not forget, Switzerland only has 8.5 million inhabitants compared to the United States' 330 million, making these numbers absolutely insane. But even with Congress's recent plans to hand $30 billion over to Amtrak for a high-speed train, Amtrak has no plans to use that money for such a system. Instead, they're pouring all of that cash into restoring 18 tracks from New York to New York City, repairing an already existing tunnel, and expanding Penn Station. Basically meaning they are going to invest their government funds in what is proven to be profitable and neglect everything else. So maybe the train idea was too far-fetched. But buses should work. The only problem is that someone needs to pay for them. And currently only a quarter of public transit is paid for by ticket sales, meaning 75% is subsidized by the local, state, and federal governments, which is truly not ideal. But it simply doesn't make sense to just spend that money on expanding highways instead, as that will only worsen the problem. A fix needs to happen, and the best place to start might be the parking lots. We know the United States has way too many parking lots, so demolishing the unnecessary ones and condensing the cities would allow for more residential and commercial areas to be within walking distance of one another. It would also allow for green spaces that can be used as recreational spots, further improving the quality of life in each city. But obviously that would require the US to remove mandatory parking minimums from state laws, and that would be pretty difficult. But the benefits would be huge, as it would lead to the reduction of housing costs, something that's also a pressing problem in the United States these days. And sure, major cities like Seattle, Austin, and Detroit will never be as condensed as Copenhagen or Zurich. But the vast spaces can be used in a sort of hybrid mashup of interstate connectivity and pedestrian alternatives. The US could also take a page out of Paris's book, as they've been doing radical infrastructure changes over the past 3 decades to accommodate other modes of transport. Paris even has car-free days, where residents are encouraged to explore their city through alternative means. And they have committed to reducing the number of on-street parking spaces by 72% before 2024. But realistically, would the United States ever be able to implement anything like this? And will they ever be able to solve their infrastructure problems? A solution is needed, but what do you think that will end up being?
Yeah, that was very, very interesting. Very happy with that. That was Why America is Terribly Designed from OBF. So make sure to check that out in the description down below. So I'm going to agree with most of what he said. That was very well laid out, very informational. Definitely learned a lot from that as an American with a very narrow perspective on cities as someone who has not gotten to travel around. That was very, very eye-opening, very interesting, very intriguing. I think it was well presented in showing the directly and simply put the problems, right? The problems is public transport, is too many parking lots, too much car reliance. That's not beat around the bush. The cities are not only, heavy on cars. No, they're literally designed for cars. And that is the truth. I will admit that. The problem therein lies, this is just my opinion, so tell me yours down below on whether or not you agree with this video and then what your solution would be. I would love to hear. Here is mine. This is going to sound unfortunate, but I'm on the spot here and I got to come up with this right now. And what I have, unfortunately, is there really isn't a solution, especially right now, because, like I said, like he said, they are designed for cars. That's the problem. It's maybe some cities didn't start out that way, like he mentioned Houston, and then by the 40s or the 30s and 40s, then it started becoming kind of car reliant. But you know what? That's a long time ago. That's almost 100 years ago even. And even though they might not have technically started out that way, they certainly are that way now. it'd just be too much, especially when we're dealing with laws and state laws. But it is what it is. I still love America. I would love to, visit more places in the world. Who wouldn't? And when I finally do get to, it will be really fun to experience a city in Europe, in Asia, wherever it is that is so different from the U.S. That's just it. They're just so different, and it's really fun. It's what makes the world go round. So many different places, so many ways of doing things. The U.S. is just really big, really expansive, and better have keys to a car. Alrighty, with that being said, please throw your comments down below. As I mentioned before, throw a thumbs up on this video. Please help this video out. I appreciate it. Subscribe for more stuff like this. Suggest something along the lines of this you would like me to view as well. I'm always open to that. Check that description for this original video and other ways you can support my channel. My name is Ian. You're watching IWrocker. Until next time, guys. I'll catch you later.